offer a word of prayer. Father, as we enter into a study of your word, we ask your guidance. Guide us as we go through the word. Allow your spirit to lead and guide us. Speak to our hearts and reveal your will to us is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. So today I would want to spend a lot of time on the screen as we did last week, if you will. Looking at God Has a Plan, which is our theme for the Bible class for 2020. The other thing, though, is that I want to spend some time just answering two questions that came in last week, which we will answer quickly. And then I will move to the screen. When I go to the screen, the little picture video of me on the right-hand side may disappear and we'll focus on the screen. That's okay. We have a good studio in here, courtesy Sherry, but at least we can see what's going on the screen and focus on that as we go forward. So there were two questions. The first one came via YouTube, and somebody asked then last week, who ruled Babylon during the 7 years that Nebuchadnezzar was insane and he was wandering in the wilderness, and then his kingdom was returned to him after that? Who ruled Babylon? Well, that's a good question. We will come back to that question when we get to that chapter that focuses on the period in which Nebuchadnezzar went mad, which is really Daniel chapter 4. So we'll get to that in another few weeks. But just suffice it to say, we are not clear with respect to who ruled Babylon, but it seems as if his kingdom was maintained while he was going through the state and allowed for somebody to deputize. And then when he came back to his sanity, if you will, he was allowed to continue. The other question came from Brother Christopher from Captiville Church, and he had a very interesting question, and we talked about the different ways to interpret prophecy. And we talked about preterism, futurism, idealism, and historism. And I said to you that we have adopted a historicist approach, which is to suggest that the prophecies are developing from the time of the prophet unto the time of the end. And Brother Christopher's question was that given the fact that later on in Daniel, I believe it is in Daniel chapter 9 and then later repeated in Daniel chapter 12, 11 and 12, we are told to shut up the book until the time of the end, whether or not in truth and in fact Daniel has a futurist perspective. And that is a real interesting approach, if you will, that he has developed. Or he is asked about, and our view is that historism is kind of the predominant view by which we view prophecy, especially apocalyptic prophecy in Daniel, which is from the time of the prophet all the way to the end. And so even though he said shut up the book, there are sections of Daniel that were being fulfilled along the way. But when you got to the very end of the book of Daniel, and some of the prophecies that were being proffered, if you will, for the end of time, it was difficult for Daniel to even understand that. So we said to him, don't worry, leave that out for the time when knowledge shall increase and men shall run to and fro, and then you'll have a better answer. So the fact that those events would unfold more in our time than in Daniel's time doesn't take away from the fact that the theme and the approach of the book is a historicist approach in terms of stuff being revealed as we go along. Everybody okay with that? I know you can't answer me, but you could always raise your hand or send an okay or something to just see that you're all right with where we are so far, right? All right, so Brother Pat raised his hand and he said he was okay with that. Is it that you have a question, Brother Pat? You have a question or not? Pastor, yeah, you have a question?
No, I'm okay. I'm comfortable with that.
Good, great. God bless. So let's go back to where we were before. All right, so let's get going. We want to get into today's session. And again, we continue with the overall theme of God Has a Plan. And I continue to upload the presentations that we do each Sabbath onto this website here called therostrum.org. All right, so my face may disappear a bit from the screen, but I'm still here. You're hearing my voice. So let's keep going. So we want to today talk about lesson 2. God reveals his plan to a Babylonian king. So we've been focusing on this theme. God has a plan, and now we come to the fact that God reveals his plan to a Babylonian king. And let's remember that it is God's desire to communicate with us. And today, some people say to us, well, should I be focusing heavily on dreams and what dream God gives me? Remember, the time has changed. Now we have a whole body of information through the Bible, through numerous bits of literature. A lot of people have written about the Bible. So there's a lot that is flowing out there, and we like to believe the Bible itself and, of course, prophetic writings are what will guide us more than anything else. In Daniel's times, they depended upon the prophets to guide them. That's what the prophets were. They were people who spoke after God. We talked about that last week. And so there was not a whole lot of writings. And Nebuchadnezzar himself was concerned about the future and what will happen to him. And so in his discomfort, if you will, over the fact that he did not know what will happen to his kingdom after he had passed, God revealed the future to him. And this is what we will cover in chapter 2. Before we do that, however, we want to just review some key points from last week. The first key point we want to review is that when we talk about the biblical world, we're really talking about the Middle East and to some extent Europe and Northern Africa, right? So this general area is kind of what we're talking about. The arrow is pointing to Mesopotamia, which is one of the more prominent areas of the Bible and where the Bible history is kind of cemented. And that includes modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran. And I reminded you that even when the Americans went into Iraq in the first Gulf War, there were images of Saddam Hussein that were very much akin to Nebuchadnezzar. It's almost as if Saddam Hussein saw himself as a modern-day reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so that is kind of where we are with respect to that. Let's move on, if you will. So the biblical lands, if you will, in the Bible would have been places like Rome, which is where Italy is today, Greece, Macedonia, the 7 churches of Asia is more, if I go back to this side, is more along the area of Turkey kind of thing. Matter of fact, the Isles of Patmos was just out here where John the Revelator was imprisoned. It was just off the coast of Turkey. So we begin to have a sense of how relevant some of these modern day countries were back in the day and how old they are. They are not countries that have only now started. They were around for quite a long time. And that's something you always need to remember. I always give this story of when the Americans first invaded Iraq, and one of the American soldiers, it was written in Time magazine, he came to the Iraqi elders and he said to them, we are here to bring you democracy and a better way of life. And they said, how old is your country? And he said, well, we were around since 1776, just over 200 years ago. And they said, we have been around before Jesus Christ. So it kind of shows that these countries are very ancient countries, rich history. And they really, we need to remember that as we go forward. What is Europe today is really a number of different countries that are bordered together on the land masses by borders, but they are part of a larger continent we call Europe. But there are many individual countries that make up Europe, and we need to remember that as we go forward. So this is kind of some of the lands that are referred to in the Bible from time to time, Canaan and Israel, etc., Babylon, Egypt, etc. Now, it doesn't mean that there were not other civilizations blossoming around the time when all of this was going on. But the fact is that because this was where God's people resided, and this is where a lot of the Bible stories are rooted, we find that the Bible speaks to this area as if it is the whole world. Again, that is not unique. Even in today's world, I am a big fan of basketball, as you know, and whenever the NBA plays and it's finished, whoever wins the NBA, they call them world champions, but they only played in the US. But as far as the US is concerned, America is so advanced with its basketball that whoever wins in America is considered to be world champions. And even though later on they will have the Olympics and they would have FIBA championships and stuff. It doesn't compare. So that once they win in America, it's considered to be the world. So they see themselves as the world. And so spoke in China and stuff, they see the people around the Pacific Ocean as being their world. So in the Bible times, if you lived in one of these areas, or things were happening in these areas, then it was considered to be the whole world. So when Babylon said he controlled the whole world, he is really talking about this area around Mesopotamia, the Middle East. But as we will come and see later, what we saw last week, some of these kingdoms extended even beyond this area into Asia and that kind of thing, right? We said that before Babylon, there were Assyrian kingdoms and Egyptian kingdoms. And we talked about that last week. And we said the Assyrians control parts of Northern Africa, Egypt, etc. They control parts of Greece and stuff. And a whole lot of the Fertile Crescent and around where Judea and stuff existed. So that was just a quick recap. We continue with the recap. One of the things we talked about last week is that we said that we need to recognize that when we study prophetic writings, we are looking at two types of prophetic writings. One, of course, is classical prophecy, and the other is apocalyptic prophecy, which is prophecy that speaks to the time of the end and extends to the time of the end. And what we said is that classical prophecy is conditional, so that when you spoke to the prophets, when the prophet spoke to the people of Israel and stuff, if the people were obedient, then God would do certain things. If they were disobedient, God would do certain things. And I told you last week, the best example of that is Jonah and Nineveh. When the Ninevean people were obedient, the people of Nineveh were obedient. I don't know if you could call them Ninevians, but the people of Nineveh were obedient. Then God didn't destroy their city anymore. And even though Jonah didn't understand it, that was a good example of classical prophecy. Apocalyptic prophecy, however, is unconditional. In other words, God is giving a view of the world events, and he's basically saying this is how the world events will unfold. They are very general sometimes and sometimes very specific, but the fact is it is not conditional on man's activity. God has a plan, and that's why we've been using that theme, God has a plan, because this is saying that despite all of that, things are happening in the way God wanted to happen, right? So classical versus apocalyptic prophecies. And I said to you that you need to be very, very careful when you talk to people about prophecy. That is why I like to say your first message must be to tell people about Jesus Christ and the love of Christ, and let people come to that first, and then we'll deal with prophecy after. Because sometimes if you start on a prophetic basis, you don't know whether or not the person you are talking to or trying to convince is following a classical prophecy approach, or they are following the apocalyptic prophecy. So they may read something in the Old Testament that speaks to Israel and Israel's rise, etc. And some people make references to that to today and say, well, Israel after Second World War and the nation was formed, they will become dominant again. But that may have very well been applicable to the time way back then, and it was conditional, as opposed to the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, which are pointing to periods way down into history and into when Christ will come a second time and the earth will be over. So that was, again, just a recap to keep you in the focus. The other thing I wanted to review quickly is that we talk about 4 methods of interpretation, right? And some people ask me, why am I doing this? Well, this is important because, again, when you talk to certain people, different believers and people who have different beliefs, you also need to appreciate what philosophy are they adopting. For instance, futurism and preterism, it is argued by the theologians, came into being after the Reformation with Martin Luther. And you found that the established church wanted to find a way to sort of interpret the prophecies different from how the Protestants were interpreting it. And they came up with futurism and preterism, right? So that kind of says that if I am talking to another believer who has a preteristic view, and I am coming with my historicist view, and I say, listen, the Bible is saying that these things will happen soon and other things will go on, I need to be ready. And they say to me, listen, all of that has happened already. then you realize you have a disconnect because clearly they have two different approaches. What I can say to you though is that historism as an approach, and we'll just come back to the definition, has been used by the ancient historians and scientists, Isaac Newton, Galileo, and all the others. When they interpreted scripture, they would have used historism as their approach going forward. So quick summary, right? In pretheism, we assume that the whole significance of Daniel and Revelation is in the past. It already happened. And there's nothing now to be worried about, right? As a matter of fact, some people say by the end of the 1st century AD, everything in those 2 chapters was already completed. And there's a heavy focus on Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a Roman emperor who really put some persecution on the Jews. And they feel that when it speaks about beasts and stuff, it's referring to him as opposed to anything long in the future. And then futurism takes the other approach and says, well, everything that happens in these books is really towards the end of time. I don't need to worry about that now. Forget what you see going on now. Those things are something that will happen towards the end of time. Idealism, on the other hand, takes a whole different view. And idealism takes what I like to call the allegory type of view, which it simply says that everything in the Bible is really about good versus evil. And what is going on in the world today is really a representation of good versus evil. And it's not really meant to be literal, but it's really meant to be figurative. And I spoke to you last week about George Orwell's Animal Farm and other books and stuff. Gulliver in Lilliput, Gulliver Travels was also another allegory that was meant to depict other nations as opposed to something real. So we need to understand that. But we are adopting, certainly in this Bible class, and certainly as you go forward, we are aligned with what is historically been the approach with the Bible, which is to say that the prophecies of Daniel are symbolic prophecies, and they are unfolding from the time of the prophet. I have the 1st century here because I was talking about Revelation more so. But we can go back and say from the time of the prophet until the end of time. It happens to Daniel as well. All right, so before I go to the next section, which is the nature and context of the book, I will pause a little bit and take any questions. If there are none, we will go forward. If you have a question, just raise your hand. We take it, or you can type it on the YouTube screen. But I haven't seen any questions so far, so just take a few minutes and then we will continue again. Right, everybody's hearing me okay? If you're hearing me okay, you can just raise your hands and say you're hearing me, and then I'll lower your hands after that. All right? Great, everybody is nice, man. I love that. Good. A lot of good responses. All right, so let's go again. So we now into, again, this part of the review, but we're heading into the chapter, really, the nature and the context of the book of Daniel. I think that's important, right? So one of the things I will mention to you is that just as how Jesus was born at the time when the Romans were in charge, remember, I mean, as we celebrate Easter this weekend, it's important to remember that Jesus was put to death by the Romans using a Roman form of persecution, which was the cross, right? Crucifixion. The Romans had invented that to put fear in the minds of the captives, which were the Israelites, that when they saw how horrible this death is, a lot of them would not consider running away from the kingdom or trying to fight the people in the kingdom. So in the case of Daniel, however, he is living in the time of Joachim, who is the king of Judea, but during the time of his lifetime, which and some people argue he was maybe about 16 or 18 when he was first captured, Nebuchadnezzar makes the long trek. At that time, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't even king yet. His grandfather was the one in charge, and Nebuchadnezzar was like the leading general. He makes the trek, and he comes all the way across the landmass, and he comes to Judea, and he captures Daniel and his friends in one of his sojourns. He does this about 3 times. And in one of his first or second sojourns, he captures Daniel and his friends. And he takes them as young men who he wants to work in his kingdom. And he carries them back. So it's a long journey. like I said last week, Daniel and his friends would have been traveling maybe for months, because this is like a walk, animals, camel, horses, whatever. This is a long run until they get to Babylon. When they get there, it's really far. Now they're under the control of Babylon. So this is the period in which the book is being written. It's written at a time when Jerusalem and the Israelites are held captive in Babylon, and they live under a Babylonian king. I'll talk a little bit about Babylon in a bit as we go forward, right? What we also reminded you last week is that Babylon, the book of Daniel, is written in two languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. And you may say, well, what is the significance of that? What we found was that when Daniel gives visions about kings and the world and stuff, then he uses Aramaic, which is what we are going to study today. But when he talks to his Jewish nation, then he uses the Hebrew language exclusively, which we see in Daniel 8 to 12 going forward, right? And then part of chapter 1. So the key, however, is to know that there's a kind of mirror structure going on here in the book. We talked about that last week. It talks about the vision of empires, which we're going to study today. But there's also a repeat of that vision of the empires in chapter 7. And then in chapters 3, which we'll study next week, God delivers from a fiery furnace. And we find that in Daniel chapter 6, God delivers from the lion's den. So there's a kind of similarity, a mirror image, if you will, from one to the next. And then in Daniel chapter 4, which is where the question came earlier, Nebuchadnezzar is judged. But by the time we get to Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar is judged. So there's a sort of mirror image running through here, which I always like to see, that if you go to draw a line, sorry, well, it's not a good line. But I could, yeah, let's get rid of that. That is not a good line. But if you were to draw a line through the middle here, basically we will be suggesting that this is a mirror image of each other. And that's just a note, and that will come in very handy when we get on later. The other thing I wanted to recall, which I don't think we covered last week, and we will this week, is that there are two literary approaches in the book of Daniel in terms of how it is written. The first is what I call a narrative style. They are stories, anecdotes. So chapter 1, we have the story of the guys refusing to eat the king's diet, Daniel and his friends. In chapter 2, we're trying to figure out a dream. That's a nice story. You could read it to your family. You could even read chapter 1 with your family and your young children, etc. And then by the time we get to chapter 3, it's real drama, intrigue, better than any Netflix series. We find these guys are surviving a fiery furnace, and then Jesus himself walks with them. We talk about that next week. By chapter 4, the king has become mad. Chapter 5, there's handwriting on a wall before a nation is destroyed. These are good stories. Daniel surviving the lion's den. So these are good stories, and they really are anecdotal. They are telling the story of what happens to the star boy, which is Daniel and his friends, during that time when they're in captivity. And it makes for good reading. It makes an interesting reading, but I want to suggest to you, as you will discover as we go through this Bible class, they are not just stories to keep us entertained, but they are powerful lessons in these stories for our future and our understanding of the scriptures. The other approach, of course, is that some of the chapters are prophetic. So chapter 2, even though it talks about figuring out a dream, there's some prophecy inside of there when we talk about the statue of a metal man, right? And then in chapter 7, there's a dream of beasts. Chapter 8, more dreams of beasts and a judgment scene. And then chapter 9, details of a long prophecy. So this is sort of the prophetic part. When we get to chapters 10 and 12, there's still some narrative stories about warring nations and stuff. But there's also a prophetic implication. When we talk about kings of the north, kings of the south, and a heavenly champion. All right, so understand that when you go through Daniel, you will, and the prophecies, maybe Daniel more so and less Revelation, but when you go through Daniel, you can find some very good narratives that are really heartwarming stories you can read, and stories of intrigue and plot and counterplot, etc. But there's a lot of prophecy tied up in the book. I say that to say that when you are engaging young people in Bible study, it is good sometimes to maybe start off with the narratives because it gives us a good sense of what intrigues you and what makes you feel very interested in the book. And then as you go along, you could find that it is really an open door into the prophetic aspects of the book. So that is another important part to learn, right? So we go in again to the main themes of chapter 1. The main theme of chapter 1 is that God is in control. It may look as if Judea was under captivity, but the book starts off in Daniel chapter 1 verse 12 by saying, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judea, into the hands. In other words, God allowed Babylon to capture Judea. And that's something you must remember, that when events in the world are going on, they are not just capricious, they are not just events that are occurring by chance, but by and large, the hand of God is involved and he's making things happen in the way he would like it to go. And I find that to be very, very significant, right? So there are times when it looks as if God is defeated and he cannot defend his own people, but the fact is God is in charge of everything, right? So God used Babylon to punish his people, which we are told about in Habakkuk. That was a classical prophecy that promised that would happen. But then we find as we go along that God is still in control, and he had said that they would only be in Babylon for 70 years. This becomes important because this was a prophecy. And we'll talk about Cyrus in a bit. He was also prophesied. But you notice in Daniel chapter 9, it begins with a prayer where Daniel is praying to go back into Jerusalem because he knows that his 70 years are up. And he understands that if the 70 years are up, then it's time for him to go back into his hometown in Judea, right? So this last part here is extremely important. We can be sure that God's will is always in control. God will always, be in control of history. He will protect his people to the end until his second coming. Now that is a real faith statement, because sometimes God's people die. Sometimes God's people get sick. Sometimes God's people get into accidents. But we need to understand the whole span of Earth's history and understand that even when that happens on this earth, God has a plan for us in the hereafter. All right? So I just want to talk a little bit about Babylon. Babylon, of course, was an ancient city in Southwest Asia. It was established along the Euphrates River. That becomes important. The town itself was the main city was established over the Euphrates River, so they got water to manage the city. It was really good architecture and engineering. It was known for its magnificence, so it was always a powerful nation. But notice that Babylon had its own religion and its own beliefs and laws. So that's important. If you were in Babylon, and we come to that in a bit, Babylon had its own religion. So this is not just another nation that was just doing what it wants. This was a nation that had an agenda. It was promoting their own approach to the world. All right? If you go back to the etymology, which is how the word started, we are told that Babylon comes from two words, Bab and Ilani, which means God. And if you put them together, it really means that the gates of the God. So Babylon was really meant to be the gates of the God. Through Babylon, the gods of the universe, who were supposed to be these multitude, this plethora of heathen gods, they would pass through Babylon to reign on the earth. Now that is not unfamiliar to us if you are a good Bible student, because you remember that in the Old Testament, we studied after the flood with Noah, they attempted to build a tower called Babel, which was also of the same origin, if you will, same word origin, and meant the same thing. It was really meant to touch the heavens. It was a way of defying the fact that God couldn't touch me if I were way up there. So Babylon as a nation, coming from that same history, really represents a city that is prominent, powerful, and has its own belief system and laws, and does its own thing. Is that okay? Now, if you accept that, if you accept this in particular, then he began to realize that if later on in the Bible, people refer to other places as Babylon, even though Babylon no longer exists, then he began to understand. So our Rastafarian brothers in the 80s would refer to the police as the Babylon. And that was for the good reason, because they felt that the Babylon had their own laws and their own beliefs, and they were not part of that, right? So later on in the scriptures, you would find, especially in Revelation, Revelation refers to modern day nations and governance as Babylonian in nature. Not that Babylon exists then, but that it was going back to this period where when Babylon exists, they had their own beliefs and they created an opportunity for the gods to reign upon the earth, which is, of course, when it's common gods like this, it means gods who are not the same gods as Jehovah or Yahweh, right? Which I think I had said, yeah, we'll pick that up in another slide. The other thing I want to just emphasize importantly is that when Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon captures a nation, he doesn't just capture, but he converts. And it's important to keep that in your mind. Babylon not only captures, but she converts, all right? So the ways he converted was he changed their residence from Jerusalem to Babylon. So you move from your home and your comfort space to a place of discomfort. He changed their names. Their names used to remind them of God. Mishael and stuff, Hananiah, etc. He changed their names, and Daniel's name was supposed to represent God, etc. He changed their names to Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which were all names linked to the hidden gods that the Babylonians observed, right? He changed their education. So he taught them differently, and he gave them different culture and religion. And then he changed their diet so that they would become more and more like a Babylonian people. So it's important to realize that Babylon not only had its own religion, beliefs, and laws, but it also attempted to bring everybody in line to what they believe, right? So if you accepted these changes, you would become royal public workers. You'd work for Daniel. So I want to suggest that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were really a remnant of the people who had come across. And they seem to have stood up to all of these approaches by Babylon to convert them. And they remain steadfast, which is a little nugget you need to keep, because that becomes really important later on when we start to talk about this book and its application to the last days. I told you that there's a narrative section to Babylon as well as a prophetic section. So I wanted to summarize the story quickly, so that at least, by the way, you should have read Daniel chapter 2 before you came to today's session. So we won't spend a lot of time going through the actual scripture, but we can do that for next week. You need to read Daniel chapter 3, because we will be going through that and know all the details, because we'll go through that as well. So in Daniel chapter 2, the narrative begins like this, right? So by now we are not into paganism and that kind of thing anymore, because the king has kind of given up. He let Daniel eat his own food. Daniel is worshiping, but Daniel is working hard for the king. We need to remember that. Some of you feel that when you are Christians, you're not supposed to be involved with the world and you'll be separate from them. Daniel was a hard worker, and he had good work ethic, and he did what God wanted him to do. So the king liked him, and the king really allowed things to happen. So Daniel is living and functioning. He's part of the advisory team to the king. From time to time, he would give advice on what is going on in the country and how things should go. So he has a permanent position as an advisor to the king. You know, Nehemiah was a cupbearer. Daniel is not a cupbearer, but he is close to the king. And through the many wise men, counselors and stuff, he gives advice. That's important, eh? And Nebuchadnezzar, even though he was an autocratic king and a king who had absolute power, he still looked for advisors to guide him. And that's maybe a little humbling experience. All of us need to remember that I don't care how good we are, sometimes we need advice. All right, so he was a part of that. And in this period here, we find that the king is concerned. Nebuchadnezzar this is actually his second year. So he is only in his second year in reign as king. but he's already concerned about what happens after his death and how long his kingdom will last. As a matter of fact, some of the ancient artifacts discovered from Babylonian era suggest in its writing that Nebuchadnezzar believed his kingdom would last forever. So again, here is Babylon believing they would last forever, even though the history of the world is such that you will see kingdoms rising and falling all the time. So this is the context in which Nebuchadnezzar goes to sleep. He's concerned about what will happen in the future with his kingdom, and he gets a dream. God gives him a dream. I want you to remember that God gave the king who had captured Jerusalem and destroyed it a dream about the future. Be careful when you are disrespectful of leaders who are appointed in today's world, because sometimes you don't know if God is using them and talking to them to advance his agenda. And that's an interesting point, right? So here is a Babylonian king who represents everything anti-God, who God comes and gives a dream. He didn't give it to Daniel, he didn't give it to a prophet, he gave it to Nebuchadnezzar, right? So the king has a dream, but as fate would have it, when he gets up in the morning, he can't remember the dream. But he knows that whatever he dreamt was troubling and had him tossing and turning and concerned. That has happened to all of us over time, right? So that's the first thing we learn, that he has a dream. So he calls all his counselors and he says to them, I had a dream. They say, okay, tell us the dream and we'll interpret it for you. He said, no, I can't remember it. Tell me what a dream and then tell me the interpretation. So these counselors are like, well, that's not how it works. You got to tell us the dream, because, you know, there's another author who suggests that these counselors had stock interpretations. If you dream about cow, they'll tell you that you need to see about the land. If you dream about a fowl, they'll tell you need to fly and consider more nations. So they had these stock answers waiting. And whatever the king would dream, they were able to come up with something. But this time, they couldn't tell the king what he dreamt because the king didn't tell them. But if they were really good, and we say counselors here, but some of them were magicians and sorcerers and stuff, right? So the king expected that they should be able to tell him. As a matter of fact, at that point, he seems to have had an epiphany. And he felt that these guys were making up stories to tell him all the time. And so he said, these are tests for you. If you can't tell me what a dream, and then you can't just tell me, but you have to also interpret it. I'm killing all of it. That is fundamentally what it came down to. So they started to conquer among themselves, and they came back and they said, what you ask is impossible. No man could do that. No God could do that, except the God who does not dwell among other gods. That's what is written in the scriptures, right? So he says he threatens to kill all of them. So the counselors are normally magicians, astrologers. Astrologers are not astronomers. Astronomers look into the universe and they try to figure out where Jupiter and Mars is, and they look at constellations and they work out the physics of the universe and try to determine how we can, what the dimensions, etc., and stars, etc., and black holes and stuff. Astrologers are a different story. Astrologers are people who have some or the other been able to make a magical connection between a constellation in heaven and your ability to get a job next week, right? That is a whole different ball game, right? And then you had sorcerers. Well, I mean, that's straightforward. Sorcerers are really black magic kind of fellas. But then you had the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were really businessmen and intelligentsia, if you will, of Babylonian period. They were wise men who could do certain things and talk certain things. So they were all part of it. I suspect Daniel would have been part of the Chaldean group, if you will, right? The group who would provide business advice to the king. So these advisors are religious, but they are not of Yahweh Jehovah God. In other words, they are not of the Jewish God, right? They are of a different. So I'm saying to you that you have a Babylonian system where the people who are advising the king looks religious, but they are not really religious because they cannot do what religious people would do in terms of being able, religious prophets would be able to do in terms of interpreting the dream, right? So the king orders the death of all wise men, and that includes Daniel, because Nebuchadnezzar kind of goes into a huff and a puff, and he, in his haste, he kind of says, kill everybody. Of course, so we've moved from the intrigue and the plot. I always tell you this is a good narrative. It moved from the king having a dream he couldn't understand to where the star boy Daniel is about to get killed, right? So Daniel responds by praying. Everybody okay that? When you are in trouble, you need to pray. I know some of you feel I don't believe that, but yes, when you're in trouble, you're supposed to pray, right? So Daniel responds by praying, and then he goes to sleep because he gets the response in a vision. Some of you need to think about that for a little bit and ask yourself, some of you can't sleep now with COVID-19. And they say you haven't reached in your house yet. Daniel was almost guaranteed to be killed the next day, but he still went to sleep because he had prayed to God and he expected God to work things out. And that's real faith. Yeah? So God answers his prayer in a dream as well. And Daniel, who I like to refer to as a remnant of the Israel that existed in the reign of God, during the reign of Babylon, communicates God's will. So here you have all these Jewish people, all these other religious people in Babylon, but a remnant, a small group, and now who God speaks to and gives a vision about the end. And he gives it to Daniel, and Daniel will now communicate God's will. Good story so far, right? So the king is ecstatic because the account of his dream is correct. In other words, as Daniel starts to tell him, this is what you dreamt. He said, yes, 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 this is really what I dreamt. And then Daniel gave him the interpretation, which was God's plan and destiny, which we'll talk about in a little bit, right? So don't worry about that. We'll get into that. So both the king and Daniel praises God. And for a while, the Babylonian king follows the God of Daniel, Yahweh, Jehovah, God, right? So he follows the Jewish God for a while because he was so impressed with what it had done. But if you follow the Jewish God because you are fascinated, that will last for too long. If you're following God because you think he's a magician or he did some great thing in your life, but you don't have a genuine relationship with him, then that does not last as long as we like it to last. All right? So that's the story. It's a nice story, right? It begins with some drama here. There's a little bit of counterplot inside of here and a thriller. And by that time, the movie, if it's in the movie, the music playing well, dread when they say you go in and kill everybody. And then it ends with a nice happy ending where both Daniel and the king are reassured. As a matter of fact, that this time Daniel is given even more power and he's able to ask Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to work alongside him, and the king agrees. So the king praises them. That's the narrative. Let's keep going. I want to talk about the Babylonian wise men. They were magicians, sorcerers, astrologers, right? Enchanters. They tried to keep the gods happy. Magicians and sorcerers, they kept people happy by warding off demons and evil spirits. Astrologers, they studied the stars and predicted the future. So this whole group of people represented, if you will, in Babylon, a system that was not really based on God, but a system nonetheless that had its a lot of sway in how the nation ran. So these heathen people, these people who believe in, I can call it spiritualism, and they believe in other forces and stuff, they were advising the king together with the other religious leaders, and that created this whole Babylonian system of religion, right? But when it didn't really deliver what it wants, God said to execute them all. So that's just, I could pause here and take any questions if anybody has them. Raise your hands and we will take any questions. I haven't seen anything on the YouTube chat. So I think we are okay, and we have a nice crowd here. We have about 35 people and about 22 people on the YouTube. So we're doing okay so far. And somebody has a question. Yes. I'm unmuting you. Any question? All right. I saw a hand went up, but I didn't see any question to go with that. Okay. Maybe there's a hands up to say we're okay. Let's keep going. So now we get to the dream itself, right? So we finish the narrative part and we get into the dream. And I really want to make sure we finish at good time today. So we go in. What the king sees is that he gets what he sees in his dream is that he sees a statue. Now it's interesting that he sees a statue because in ancient times, kings will normally represent their prominence with statues. And interestingly, if people had to show their loyalty to the kingdom, they normally will bow at the feet of the statues. I remember that. Remember that when we come to where the stone will hit the image, because that is normally where people would be worshiping the wrong kingdom, if you will, right? So here he sees a statue. It's a statue of a man, but it is not a homogeneous man, right? It is not one metal. It's a metal man. But the metals are different. The man's head is made up of gold. His chest and arms are made up of silver. Whenever they show these images, they always show the arms folded. I don't know why, but anyway. His thighs and upper legs are made up of brass. His feet are made of iron. And then his legs, are made of iron. And his feet are made up of iron and clay. That is what he sees, right? That's not the only thing he sees, though. What he sees is that somewhere after he has seen this image and is established, a stone cut out of nowhere comes and hits the image at its feet, mashes up everything, turns into chaff is the word the Bible uses, and everything blows away, right? So that clearly says that this stone fills the whole earth and lasts forever. So some key points. Hits the feet, destroys everything here, fills the whole earth, and it lasts forever, right? That is the dream that the king saw. And I suppose that will disturb anybody. So he is now concerned. Now, one of the things we are happy about is that when we study the book of Daniel, we don't have to guess about the interpretation of this dream because the Bible actually goes about interpreting the dream for us. And it gives us enough if we were to tie that back to modern day history and what we know of historical records to understand what is taking place, right? So Daniel now tells him this dream, and he comes to the king and he says in Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, talks about things, and he ends it and saying, you are the head of gold. So Babylon is the head of gold, right? Immediately then we begin to realize that this image is really an image of nations that will one day, if these metals represent different nations, there's almost an implicit and implied understanding that, and I found that very interesting, I read it in one of the articles, that gold is a precious metal, but it is not the strongest of metals. Gold is a bit malleable, right? You could break it and hit it, and that's why you have gold chains and gold bracelets and gold anklets and stuff, right? Silver is not as precious as gold in the eyes of the world, but it is also malleable. But as you get to brass, which is actually an alloy, if you will, you find that the strength of the material becomes greater. So as you move from gold to brass, as you go this way, the value of the metal decreases, but the strength increases, which kind of says that the successive kingdoms may not be as powerful and stuff as Babylon, but they will certainly become stronger in the way they manage stuff, right? So this is something you just need to remember. Again, if you understand what I'm saying, value decreases here, but strength increases in this direction, right? So that kind of tells us. And then if we are saying that each metal section represents a kingdom, it seems to suggest that in this period of kings that are iron and clay, a stone will come, a bigger kingdom will come and fill the whole earth and live forever, right? And that is what we have to figure out. So he says, you are the head of gold. Babylon was indeed known as a golden nation, hanging gardens, beautiful place, and that's a relatively easy thing. And I told you just now that the ancient writings suggest, if you looked at the hieroglyphics and stuff related to the old finance of Babylon, it says, may it last forever, right? This was from a whole letter from Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar believed that everybody will fall prostrate at his feet. So much he kind of believed that Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar, ruled the Middle East, just what we saw here in our map last week. Rules the Middle East, Mesopotamia, from 605 to 539 BC. Don't worry about the dates, we'll come back to that. We'll keep repeating that over the time as we study the book. But just to appreciate that as with every other civilization, even today, nations rise and fall, right? And some kingdoms and political parties will run forever, and some will eventually die, right? So in Babylon's case, from 605 to 539, he would have controlled most of this area here. But then if the sequence is right, we should expect, just going back a bit, we should expect that there is another kingdom that comes after, but we don't have to guess, because that's exactly what the scripture tells us, right? So it says, verse 39 says, but after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, and that's what the chest of silver is meant to represent, but nonetheless, it's another kingdom. Well, is this true or not? Of course. In Daniel chapter 5, we will study the handwriting on the wall, and during that period, the Babylonian kingdom was actually destroyed by a nation led by a mighty king called Cyrus. Cyrus was actually predicted in the book of Isaiah, when God gave a prophecy, conditional prophecy that says, classical prophecy, sorry, thus said the Lord is anointed to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held to subdue nations before him, and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. This is prophecy of its best, because when we get to Daniel chapter 5, we will realize that when the writing came on the wall, the king's clothes became loose and fell off of him. And then the way Cyrus attacked Babylon was that he came below the city gates and opened them so his men could walk on the riverbed and come and destroy the city, right? So the Medes and the Persians, and I talked to you last week about the Medo-Persian Empire, not just the Persians, but they were Medo-Persians before. People forget the Medes, are the ones who lived after Babylon from 539 for a long time, almost 200 years, to 331 BC, right? So the Medes and the Persians came after, and we talked about that last week. I told you the Persians not only controlled parts of Northern Africa and Eastern Europe, and then the Middle East, but they went as far as India. And we talk about the fact that in the book of Esther, the queen who Esther replaced was Vashti, which we know is an Indian name, right? So clearly, the Persians had really covered a lot of space, a lot of ground in the time that they were around, right? So he then says another kingdom after the Persians will arise. So again, we have this is no rocket science here. He said the first kingdom was Babylon. Historically, it is a historical fact that Cyrus and the Medo-Persians invaded Babylon and took over and ruled for almost 200 years. So it's a historical fact that the next kingdom was the Medes and the Persians. So if we know that, then we simply have to ask ourselves, who came after the Medes and the Persians and represented by brass? Well, interestingly, the Greeks came afterwards. The Greeks were led by a young general called Alexander the Great. Alexander has an interesting history. Alexander, by age 28 or so, was already in charge and running things. And a matter of 4 years, he had turned Greece into a powerful empire. And by 32, he got sick. Some argue it was a cold. I don't know if it was corona. But he got sick and he died. And then when he died, now the Greeks were not accustomed to having one autocratic leader. The Greeks were masters of distributed leadership. They had different provinces. They would come together and hold consensus meetings and senates, etc., and make decisions. When Alexander united them, that was a unique thing. It didn't last for long, and nobody else could have done it after him. So what then happened was that when he died, because they couldn't get anybody to do this, they broke up the kingdom into four, and there were four generals who ran the Greek Empire for a while. But again, that's just to keep you, we come to that at a later stage, but it's just to get a general flow of the kingdoms, right? So Greece, they went from 331 to 168 BC, right? And I gave you this picture last week and told you how much land the Greek Empire controlled. Now, if we got to brass, then the next metal we should expect is, if we were in open class, I would ask you, but I can't wait for you to answer, is iron. So the next nation is the legs of iron. So he says, finally, this is Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, there'll be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. Remember I told you that as you came down the image, the strength of the metal increases, even though the value decreases. So iron was all over the place, but it was strong. Gold was not as prominent, but it was precious. All right? So iron breaks and smashes everything. So this is a kingdom that arose after the Greeks. And that is the kingdom that would really control everything. Well, I mean, if you are a good Bible student or even a student of world history, you would know that after the Greeks ran the world, Jason and the Argonauts and Zeus and all that kind of thing, we then had the Romans, right? So the Romans came after, and in Gibbon's famous book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he actually used the term. He says the images of gold and silver and brass that might serve to represent a nation and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarch of Rome. So Rome was in play before Christ and about 2 or 4 centuries after Christ. That's important. And I again reminded you that when Christ was upon the earth, Caesar Augustus ruled the world. So there's no doubt that the Romans were in control. Roman centurions were the ones who were put him on the cross. A Roman soldier will tomorrow morning move aside and allow Gabriel to take him out of the tomb, etc. And even the relics of Rome that exist in Europe today, they show a lot of iron and stuff as part of the architecture. So this is a good, interestingly, the Bible written so many thousands of years ago used iron to represent Rome, which is exactly what characterized the nation way back then, right? That is just phenomenal. And again, I give you a sense of Rome's extent of power. So you had a lot of Western Europe, and this is extremely important, was under Roman control, right? So you had Eastern Europe, which was today known as Turkey and stuff. All of that was under Roman control. The whole of the Middle East in terms of Judea and stuff, parts of Egypt, Libya, etc., all of that Northern Africa. Rome kind of controlled the Mediterranean Sea. So as you see here, everything around the Mediterranean Sea, including England, was Rome. Now, would there be other nations in the world who will have this kind of control? Of course. Later on, when England became a power and she controlled the world, she would control many nations. China today controls a whole swath of nations and land masses, etc. But the fact is, when we talk about the biblical record and people who in Bible times, this is a representation of Rome. So I want to emphasize something here very quickly, which is to let you know that this area here, which is Western Europe, was under Roman control, right? And what would have happened then was that you would have found a way that if you talk about successive kingdoms that will come afterwards, then you had to talk about the kingdoms who would run, who would come after Rome. Now, Rome is an interesting phenomenon because Rome not only ruled the world during that period, but Rome, you could argue, never really died. I mean, today Italy is still referred to as the center of Italy is Rome, and Rome, the Roman Empire, if you will, still exists even down to this day, which is maybe a good example of iron and clay. So he's saying that the kingdoms that come after, so let me just read the text. It says, whereas he saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom, this is singular, so it means the kingdom above it, which is Rome, the kingdom shall be divided, right? So the Roman kingdom will become divided. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they would mingle with the seeds of men. There were a number of barbarian tribes that invaded Rome towards the end after 476 BC, right? And they eventually formed modern day Europe. Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, all the other nations around here, right? Modern day Europe is effectively a legacy, a remnant of the past Roman Empire. The important thing is that by using the terminology of iron and clay, he's basically saying in the prophecy that they will try to mix, but they will not come together, right? That is really, really interesting with that prophecy, because in truth and in fact, there were a few people who tried to bring Rome together. Charlemagne, Charles V, Napoleon ended the French Revolution and then promised that he will rule the world. Kaiser William, Adolf Hitler, we know for sure. And then most recently, we had the European Union, which was not a political union, although it is a political union, that there's a European Parliament and stuff in Brussels. But we all know what happened just about a year ago. It seems like a long time in the face of this COVID. When with Brexit, we had people breaking out of the European Union. Even it was more of a commercial economic union. Britain was saying we no longer want to be part of that. And a very surprising vote 2 years ago, the whole of the UK voted to come out of the European Union, and we had Brexit, right? So that is just an indication that, if I were to summarize, that you had a head of gold, Babylon, we are told that, so we're not guessing. You had a chest of silver, Media Persia, the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus, and then other kings. When Daniel was in the lions, then Darius, the Mede, was in charge then. So they came after. They were succeeded in that area in the Mesopotamian region, and that area around the Mediterranean Sea by the Greeks, led by Alexander the Great. And then the Rome, who lasts for a really long time until after Christ, 476 BC. And then when the Romans were invaded by barbarian tribes, Rome never had its full power. It became divided, and you had feet of iron and clay. Some people say that the 10 toes of the feet of iron and clay are symbolical of the 10 barbarian tribes. We didn't get that kind of detail from the prophecy, so I try not to overreach the expectation, but it is maybe significant that we're using 10 toes and 10 tribes invaded. So there's a good point for summary. I will pause again and see if there are any questions. We still have 36 people on Zoom and 21 on YouTube. So I'll take any questions anybody has at this time. Give you a chance to let all simmer. You're on the home stretch. You're almost there. All right. All right.
Sorry.
Yes, somebody is speaking.
You hear me?
Yes, Pastor, I'm hearing you.
Right. So the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar, was in charge.
Yes.
The Persia started off with Cyrus.
Yes.
Greece, Alexander the Great.
Yes.
In terms of Rome.
Yes.
Is it safe to say that's who we say in charge of Rome at the time Rome took over?
All right, so the question we have from Pastor is, who would have been in charge of Rome at the time Rome took over, right? So Rome is an interesting construct, in that Rome would have had a Senate. So when I showed you some of the diagrams of the Roman nation, I don't want to go back so far, we would have seen some parts looks like they were covered by Senate. So Rome would have introduced a lot of political savvy in themselves, but they were always ruled by first governors and premiers, and then later on by emperors. So they didn't start off, if you will, with an absolute emperor. They started off with a senate and governors who would control sections. And then remember that whole thing about Caesar and Brutus, which we all studied, where Caesar was killed and stuff. And eventually the Senate kind of took over for a while, and then later on it was given up to the point where the emperors took over again, right? So that movie with Russell Crowe, Gladiator, is an example of that, where you had the emperor at one time and then the people were rising up to overthrow. So Rome, interestingly, had a series of emperors who ran the country during the period of time, and it includes some powerful names. Caesar Augustus, of course, who was around the time of Christ. We had Nero, who is argued was more around the 5th century when Rome burned. You had Justinian, who was an important emperor. You had Constantine, who was also an important emperor. So Rome was able to allow for succession for a long period of time and keep their empires and stuff intact. One of the things I discussed last week, and I will talk about that as we go along, is that after the 5th century AD, Rome experienced a kind of metamorphosis that is interesting. Towards the east, which is towards Turkey and stuff, Rome established its political power, which is referred to later on as the Byzantine Empire. And they were later overthrown by the Ottoman Turks, which was more Muslim, and the Turks now run Turkey. But they moved most of the kingdom to the west and to the east, where they were lacking in civil power. They passed some of that power onto the church, so that the Roman church became the more powerful aspect of, or became a part, if you will, of the Roman domination post the 5th century. So after the 5th century, when Rome was moving more to the east, and they established Constantinople, which is today known as Istanbul, which was in Turkey, and they kind of lived on that side. You found that in order to keep the east going, they gave power to the church. And then when Rome was eventually politically destroyed, you found that the church continued to have a lot of strength and power. A lot of emperors who came in the Dark Ages, the 1260 years, during the early centuries, a lot of them gave prominence to the church, because the church took on a whole different role altogether, right? But we'll talk about that later on. But the fact is that Rome would have experienced a succession of emperors who would have led them through from time to time. That's okay, Pastor?
Yes, I'm good with that.
Good, good. Any other questions, anybody? It's a good time. I like that question. It's a good time for questions. So some of you who are good Bible students and you're thinking ahead, you want me to say a lot more now, but I want to keep it only to what this outline is. Now, let me just say, this is a key outline, which is the summary here. Because this flow of nations, and I told you that historism is from the time of the prophet to the end of time. So not that there were not nations before Babylon, but Daniel, who is the prophet who's getting the vision, is living in Babylonian time. So he is in the time of Babylon, and the vision is from his time to the end of time. Well, we'll come to the end of time in a bit, but we're coming to the end of the image, if you will, right? This sequence here, I will argue with you, based on one of the slides we had before, where I did the mirror image of the book of Daniel. Now, when you get to Daniel chapter 7, this same sequence is represented here, but it may emphasize something different now. So when we got to Babylon, they didn't use a head of gold, they used a lion with 4 heads, king of the beast, but with 4 wings as well to show how fast he ruled. So you'll tell us see that, right? But the important thing is to remember, some people say prophecy hard to follow. If you remember this sequence, then the rest kind of goes in line as we go forward, right? So let's move on to come to the end of all of this. So the thing is, Daniel then said to the king that the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof is sure. Those are powerful words. So I know some Bible writers argue that when Hitler tried to unite Europe, there were some people who were very clear that he could not do it because the prophecy had said that they would not come together. And then there were some who argued that when the European Union looked like it will form a political agreement, that too couldn't survive because there were so much differences in terms of what people think, right? And we saw that recently with Boris Johnson and Brexit and that kind of thing. So it almost says that Babylon got a message, Nebuchadnezzar got a message that his kingdom will be succeeded by another kingdom, which will in turn be succeeded by another kingdom, which in turn be succeeded by another kingdom, but last for a long time and may continue in bits and pieces all the way to defeat, but they will always be succeeded, right? This is important, these words here, because you know, when we get to next week, Nebuchadnezzar decides to do his own thing. He builds an image where the whole thing is of gold, not of different metals, because he is defying this view that somebody will follow after him, right? And that is what is extremely important. So I want to go to another slide now, which is something I kind of made over the years. And you will, I am not a believer in 6,000 years rule and that kind of thing, right? But just for the sake, if we were to do a timeline, I suppose I'm a little mathematician and me, if we were to do a timeline where we would have creation, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, crisis, birth, I put 1844 here, which is the year 1844. I know you all use 1844 as your login for this webinar. You kind of see where we living in Israeli, and if this is towards the end of time, we're really living in a time where a lot has happened in the past, right? Now let me just go through some quick things, take this over this word. If we were to put a marker here around when Christ was born, then everything on this side is BC, right? Before Christ. Everything on this side is 80. So that's fair enough, right? The other thing to note is that if we said Babylon, so if we said this was 80, and we said Babylon was around 605 to 537, then the width of this arrow is kind of representative. It's not the accurate scale and precision, but it's good enough to scale drawing because it's a number line we're using here. Suggests that this is the period in which Babylon ruled, right? The Medes and the Persians came after, and they also ruled after Babylon. And then we had Greece, who came after and lived a shorter period, but they lived anyway, they ruled. And then we had our good friends, the Romans, who went beyond the birth of Christ. And they basically had, and I make the reference here to say civil Rome, because after the 5th century AD, Rome then started to splinter off, if you will, into more Eastern Rome, and Western Rome kind of gave over themselves to the church running things with political power. There was a union of church and state that occurred, right? So that's kind of what I'm suggesting to you here. And if you were to suggest Christ will come somewhere towards the end, then you have a sense of where all of these things are taking place, right? Obviously, before all here, you would have had other things happening. You had the Assyrian kingdoms, Nimrod, all that kind of thing taking place. But this prophecy comes to Daniel at a time when Judea is captured and he wants to go back home. All right, so that's kind of where we are relative to that. I will keep coming back to this slide, show the length and breadth of this series. But for now, we just take it for what it's worth, right? I hope everybody comfortable with that as it is, right? Just go over again, right? I'm saying that if there was a period here, some argue if you read the genealogy as outlined in Genesis, it's approximately 2,000 years. I am not timekeeping. And then if you went from Noah to the first, about 2,000 years, and then we live in 2020, which is past 2,000 years since Christ came, we begin to appreciate the segments. And then we are saying that Babylon, Media, Persia, and Rome would have been really around this period, and that the prophecies are towards the end. Let's deal with the feet of iron and clay. So he says, and I really want to keep this focus. So Daniel 2:44, and I think I had I don't want to chance it. I was going to bring up the Bible text, but I don't want to. Right, so this is the Bible text, right? It says, verse 44, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. In the days of these kings, not kingdom, not singular now, but plural. So I'll come back to that. Set up a kingdom, he goes to singular, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break into pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God that hath made known to the king which shall come to pass hereafter, the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof. So basically we are saying that in the days of these kings, now the only thing we could talk about these kings has to be here at the feet. Oh, you all seen it, right? I want to make sure you see it. It has to be here. Because up to this point, and Pastor Roy asked a really good question about if there was a singular leader here. We can't say like Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar was eventually succeeded by Belshazzar and stuff, right? And then we had the Medes and the Persians, which wasn't just Cyrus. We had Darius the king. We later had Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, who lived around this time. And then you had the Greeks who had Alexander, but later on the 4 generals who ran it. So the same thing here. But in each case, they were seen as one homoletic, homogeneous, cohesive kingdom, if you will, right? But when we get to the feet, though, what he is, in the feet, he's kind of saying kings, because the expectation is that when we get to the feet, we are talking about multiple nations that are existing, coexisting, and cohabiting with each other. And each of them have different kings or rulers. That is as precise as it gets when you talk about modern day Europe. Because everybody in modern day Europe has each of the nations has a leader, has a king. You have the king of Spain, the king of France. You have France doesn't have a king. You have the king of Norway. You have the king of England, the queen of England. All of the different nations we have. There's a king in Denmark, etc. So you have different places with royalty, or they have a political head, if you will, that runs it. But it seems as if these kings are coexisting together because they control this space in coexistence. So the prophecy is saying that in the days of these kings, which really seems to suggest that in the days of the feet, God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. So I begin to ask myself, what period of the world am I living in? And I know that I am living in the period of the feet. Is that okay? So it seems to suggest that God is saying to me that around this time, he will soon set up a kingdom that will destroy all the kingdoms of the world that have gone before, and his kingdom will last forever. That's a powerful message. So let's look at, then a rock comes and sets up a kingdom of God. Has this happened as yet? So ask ourselves that question. You know, we say an important prayer called the Lord's Prayer. And this weekend, I suspect a lot of Christians are praying this prayer. And then for the period of COVID, a lot of people pray it. By the end, it says, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine who is thine here? Meaning our Father, right? That is what we're praying to. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory for how long? Forever. So God intends to set up a kingdom that will last forever. Sounds familiar? A stone hits the image at his feet, fills the whole earth, and lasts forever. We know that Corinthians, Paul refers to Christ as a rock, and Isaiah and stuff refers to Jesus as the chief cornerstone. We all know that, right? Jesus is a rock. When he spoke to Peter and he said, upon this rock I will build my church in Matthew 16. Some people mistakenly interpret that to think he was talking about Peter. The gates of hell prevailed against Peter, but the rock really is Christ Jesus, right? And the belief that he is the God of heaven, he is the rock. So clearly the saying that Jesus preached that his kingdom of heaven is at hand. Did Jesus' kingdom come already when Christ died on the cross? Not necessarily. That's not what we're saying. Because that's not the rock we're talking about. We know that if Christ is within me today, then Christ lives within me and I am part of his kingdom, right? But in the days of Christ, the Jewish people wanted him to put his kingdom upon the earth one time and destroy the Romans. Jesus was saying, no, I need to die on the cross, and then I need to go to heaven. And then the angel told them that morning when they saw them in the book of Acts, he says, this same Jesus will return in like manner as you'll see him going to heaven. And then Jesus said, the next time you see me, you'll see me in a cloud, and I will come in a crown. So that by and large, Jesus himself made a reference to the fact that he would one day set up a kingdom upon this earth. Is that all right? Moving along. So the kingdom that Daniel saw comes after Europe, and Jesus lived before Europe, right? So clearly, when we're talking about this stone that is going to hit the feet, we're talking about a kingdom that we establish sometime in what I would like to call the present period of Earth's history. Anybody confused? Everybody okay? Everybody okay with this, right? No questions. If any have a chance, make sure I don't lose anybody. Are you all right? Okay, let's keep going. So, the real summary slide then is coming up, because we've broken the code around the stone. So the head is Babylon. And again, like I said, don't try to memorize the dates. We'll always become back to those dates as we go along, right? The chest, Media Persia. Going back to Pastor Roy's questions, there were different kings in Babylon, but the prominent one was Nebuchadnezzar. There were different kings in Media Persia. They started off with Cyrus, where we had Darius, and we had Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, etc. The Greeks, we had Alexander, but later on he gave in to his other generals, Seleucid and others along the way, Ptolemy and others, right? And then Rome, who rallied for a long time, more than almost 5 centuries. They were a strong nation, used a lot of different emperors. They flirted with authoritarian leadership, then they practiced senatorial leadership, etc. So we see that somebody on the YouTube is asking, what is the mountain from which the stone was cut out? So we talk about that in a bit, right? And then the feet, I am suggesting to you, and we're clear about that, is really talking about the modern day Europe, because in modern day Europe, you found that they mixed together, but they were not controlled by any one king. By the way, the fact that there's iron in the feet suggests that Rome, some or the other, continues towards the time when the stone will hit it. That is an important point that we will expand upon when we get to chapter 7 and chapter 8. But the fact that the feet is made of iron and clay suggests that Rome continues in some form or fashion as a thread towards this period. And then the second coming of Christ is what is represented by the rock. So he's asking, from which mountain was the stone cut out. So the text says, and if I could just find the text for you quickly. As he says, so verse 21 says, thou king now saw a great image, the great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, thou sawest, right? Thou sawest till his stone was cut out without hands, which smote the king upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them into pieces. Then was the iron and clay, the brass, the silver, and gold broken to pieces together, and became chaff from the summer threshing for the wind carried them, right? And the stone smote the image and became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So I hope Mr. Osborne, let's go to verse 45. He's saying 45 is the one that has good feedback. He says, for as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it was broken into pieces, the iron and the brass and the clay and the silver, the great God had made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain the interpretation thereof. So he's asking, what is the mountain from which the stone was cut off? So clearly, when we use the fact that the stone in the earlier verses suggested that when the stone hits the earth, it becomes a great mountain. It means that the stone becomes a great kingdom, right? So clearly, if it's saying that it was cut out from a mountain, it means it's coming from an existing kingdom. The only kingdom that exists outside of the earth is the kingdom of God. So effectively, we're suggesting that when Christ comes, and that's something we will discover in great detail as we go down through the rest of Daniel and then into Revelation, is that God will leave his kingdom of heaven and come to destroy the earth and establish his new kingdom upon the earth, which shall live forever, is part of God's heavenly kingdom. I hope that answers the question, but really the message is, somebody?
Can I interject here?
Yes, Pastor. Yeah, sure.
And you are correct.
Yes.
That mountain is not a literal mountain.
Yes.
It's people think in terms of the mountain is a literal mountain, a stone. And I mean, just thinking logically, if the stone crushes the image and fills the whole earth, it cannot be a literal mountain.
Yes.
So that is establishing the kingdom of God.
Yeah. So the imagery of mountain is really meant to suggest that there is a kingdom from which this stone comes out, right? And the stone is coming out from God's kingdom to establish God's kingdom upon the whole earth, right? And that's the message we really trying to send.
That's correct.
Great. Russell Osborne, who was on chat on YouTube, I hope this clarifies the question. Song's right. He says he's okay, so we can move on, right? So let's go back to our slide. So again, I want to repeat the sequence. Babylon, Media Persia, all of this has happened. Up to the Europe, all of this has happened. These are historically factual events that are lined up and very much aligned to what is in this prophecy. And then we have the only thing that is remaining is the second coming of Jesus Christ. That must be the rock, right? So the next event in history that the Bible foretells, is the second coming of Christ. Are we preparing for that day? I just read two quotes, right? One from the book Prophets and Kings. It says, in the annals of human history, the growth of nations, the rise and fall of empires, appear as if dependent upon the will and powers of man. In other words, it looks as if everything is happening according to man's desire. The shaping of events seem to a great degree to be determined by his power, ambition, or caprice. In other words, Just whenever God feels to man feels to do something, he does it. But in the word of God, the curtain is drawn aside. So when God shows us all of this, he's basically saying that Cyrus didn't come just, so I allowed it. And we behold, above, behind, and through all the play and counterplay of human interest and power and passion, the agency of an all-merciful one, silently, patiently working out the counsels of his own will. Our kingdom, the kingdom we ultimately will want to inherit, is not of this world. We are waiting for our Lord from heaven to come to earth, to put on all authority and power and set up his everlasting kingdom. Earthly powers are shaken. We need not and cannot expect union among the nations of the earth. Our position in the image of Nebuchadnezzar is represented by the toes in a divided state and of crumbling material that will not hold together. Prophecy shows us that in the great day of the great day of God is right upon us. It hasted greatly, right? It means it's coming quickly. So that's kind of my summary message for today. That what we got in Daniel chapter 2 is a nice narrative of a man who had a dream and he couldn't understand, he wanted to kill people. But what we got at the end is a prediction of Earth's history, which is very, very accurate and very, very clear about today, and gives us a template for which we will focus on going forward. I remind you what we discussed last week, that the book of Daniel reminds us that God is sovereign in our lives. He is in control of history, and God provides an example to follow for the end of time. When you are tempted to give up, when you are tempted not to do what God wants, when you feel as if the world is going crazy, know that Daniel and his friends remained faithful in the face of all drama, and they did what God wanted them to do. Next week, we do the lesson entitled Escape from a Fiery Furnace, and we pick up Daniel chapter 3. Any questions? Anybody? You could use the Q&A, you could pop your hand, or you could unmute and speak, as pastors been doing. Anybody? I saw a raise hand there from MAP.
All right. Hello, good evening, everybody. My question is, so is it that God predestined these kings to act in a certain way? It's like, anybody hear it?
Yeah, I heard you. So the question is, did God predestine these kings to act in a certain way? And that is always an interesting question, right? So one of the challenges we face with this omnipresent and omniscient God is that he knows the end from the beginning. But knowing the end from the beginning is not predestination. Everybody has a choice. So God being able to say how the sweep of world events would occur is to give us a peep into the world events as they happen. Because when we live through those events, we tend to become despondent. Daniel was virtually at sea trying to figure out what had happened to his people. The people who lived during the Roman period have been at sea. But if they study the prophecies, they would know that one day, as your people say, one day, Congo say, all of this will come to an end. And that God will bring his appearance. So is it that these kings had a choice? I say yes, they had a choice. All the other context of the Bible suggests that they had a choice, and because they had a choice, they could make decisions on their own. The fact that God illuminates the curtain of heaven and shows us the end from the beginning does not take away from the fact that they had a choice to make. So it's like Judas. Judas had a choice. If you read some of the writings around Judas, up to the upper room, Judas had a choice as to whether he would deceive Jesus or not. In the book desire of ages. Ellen White says that up to the time when Judas went into the Garden of Gethsemane and he ran out, he had a chance to repent. Peter also denied Christ, but Peter went to Gethsemane and repented. He chose to repent. Judas chose not to repent, and he hung himself and died. So there's a challenge that is going on there that is difficult for us to appreciate. So there's a dichotomy there. I will appreciate my brother that it looks as if it is predestined, but it is not. It is simply God giving us a commentary on the sweep of human history. And each person, and that includes you and I, we have decisions to make about how we will follow and what we will do. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer, but I'm up.
Yeah, thanks for that.
All right, great. Any other questions from anybody? Somebody asked me to go to the previous slide, so I went back to it. Oh, that was Melissa. Yeah. And Andre, we got your comments. Anybody else? Yeah, so my goodly wife has said that we must remember that even when we have elections, people could choose who they want to vote for, but God just simply gives a view of the outcome by way of the flow of these events. All right, there are no more questions. I don't have a poll this week at the end of the lesson, which we had last week because the poll didn't go too well. So we're hoping maybe we could use SurveyMonkey next time to poll as a way of polling rather than that we do that. Let me see if there are any questions. I just want to make sure. All right, there are no more questions. I saw somebody has a Q&A up today. Or somebody's asking, what is the names of the 10 kingdoms again and the countries they line up with today? All right, so somebody, Melissa is asking whether or not the 10 let me see if I can find that slide again and just bring it up for you. So the modern day Europe is kind of showing the 10 Babylonian tribes here. And there are many different tribes, right? So we have the Lombards, the Alemanni, the Franks, the Visigoths, the Hunyadi, the Vandals, etc. Now, if we were to superimpose one of the early slides we use today, which is this slide, back onto that, you would find that some of those same Babylonian tribes or barbarian tribes are now modern day Europe, which is part of Western Europe here today. So again, that's the point I'm making, that this is feet of iron and clay period here. These are the nations of Europe that are together. By the way, as interesting as I do this, to know that NATO, which is the North Atlantic Trade Organization, right? Treaty Organization, was established after World War II. And Turkey was struggling to be a part of NATO. Even though in the old Roman days, Turkey had been part of the empire. So we have Erdogan, who is the present Turkish president, who is a real character. And he's more aligned to Russia up here than he is to Europe. And one of the reasons, if you remember, that Ukraine has caused a lot of problems is that the Russians came down here, and if I could use my anecdote, the Russians came down here and seized Crimea during the Obama era, right? Everybody says, well, how could they do that? Because the Russians wanted to control this waterway here through Crimea, but this was belonging to Ukraine. And they couldn't do Russia anything because Putin was just doing what he wanted because he's that kind of guy. And the Europeans came together through NATO and said, let's try to fight all of this, right? And then boom, Obama loses the election and Trump comes in and Trump says, hey, you know, you see this thing all I have called NATO? I find you are not paying enough money for this. I'm not fighting no battle for you. Put some more money and fight for yourself. And all of a sudden, everybody had to give up this fight and forget Russia and Crimea because they had to worry about themselves. And then Turkey, who was trying to come into the NATO, which is an alliance of the Europeans, just to try to get some solidarity, found that if he aligned more with Russia, he was more secure than being aligned with Europe. So the point is that there is never peace and security and consensus and harmonization of political views in this group, right? Even the United Kingdom, which we just discussed, pulled out of the European Union recently because they don't want to be a part of all of this. And they say that we want to be by ourselves. Norway on the top here is not part of the European Union. So those tribes that we saw are now represented by some of these nations that are shown here today. Yes? From your previous question, Daniel 13, Gabriel was wrestling with the powers of darkness to influence the mind of Cyrus, and Michael joined him to assist. If God predestines, he would not influence minds. All right, so Charlene is saying that in Daniel 13, well, I don't know if it's 13 you really want to say, maybe 12, right? I think it's at 12 it stops. But in Daniel 11, I think it was, when we are told that God, Daniel 10:13, that's right. So she answers it, yes. So what we said is that in Daniel 10:13, we are told that God was, actually Michael was trying to influence Cyrus, who was at that time the king of Persia, to make sure that the Jews got back into their homeland. So the fact that he could influence Cyrus suggests that he was not predestined to do certain things, but he had to win them over with a decision that they had to make, right? So that further re-emphasizes the fact that there was no predestination. Yes, Mr. Map, your hand is raised again.
All right, so last question.
No, that's all right. You're allowed. Did I apologize for the question?
So I appreciate your explanation and actually understanding what you're saying and thing, but then I remember I had this verse that I encountered in our Bible study, right?
Yeah.
I think it's Romans 8:29, verse 29. So I wanted to know if you could explain that to me.
Romans.
Is with predestination and thing, it involved in it.
Okay, let's see if we can. Romans 8. Pastor, you still here? Just in case I need help on this one. For whom he did foreknow, he did predestinate to be conformed to the image of man, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Yeah, but I think this is talking about Jesus Christ, right? Which is obviously Christ would have. This is talking about Jesus Christ. This is in the direction with the Romans. He's talking about Jesus Christ here, and obviously he predestined Christ, meaning that Christ made a decision before time to come and save mankind. That's a different conversation, if you will, to saying that God predestined humans to the point where they had no choice about the decisions that they make. I think that is the difference we're trying to make. So I am happy that my God made a decision before mankind was formed to say, if man were to sin, I would come and save them. That is a decision he had made, right? And he becomes my savior and he dies on the cross as we celebrate this weekend. But the fact is, I still have a choice to decide whether I want to serve God or not. And that is the challenge I think we face, in that people must make decisions about whether they would serve God or not. And that is the message around the predestination. So while he gives a forecast of the world's destiny on an individual basis, people have to make decisions about how things will happen. And it's a little bit of a dilemma, and it's always going to be a challenge, but that is the principle you have to keep in your head, is that if there's anything, God desires all of us to be saved. I've come that we might all have life and have it more abundantly. And it's not God's will that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So God desires for us to come to Him. The challenge is that we may make decisions and choices to serve Him or not serve Him, as the case may be. Right, so Nigel is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, in which he says, I set before you blessings of life and death. Choose this day which your children would serve. Sum up, you okay with that? Sum up? All right, anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say my phone will get disconnected now. So,
Yeah, I saw that. So I was giving you a chance to come back.
alright, okay. Thanks.
So you got the answer?
Yeah, the answer, it makes sense because I thought it was referring to like us now, but it was actually referring to like Jesus.
Yes, it's referring to Jesus really at that point in time.
Oh, okay. Alright, thanks for that.
Yeah, so. Okay. Everybody okay?
Hello?
Yes, Pastor.
Yeah, God's desire is to save all men. And we can pick up the Genesis account alone is God could have programmed us to be like robots, but God gave man the freedom of choice. And so your explanation was right and target.
Yes.
So from the very beginning, God gave Adam the freedom of choice to make decisions, to think and to act and to make decisions. So the idea of man being predestined to do certain things is not biblical.
Yes. All right. Okay, so I think we okay there now. So this is, like I said, I am happy that you're spending so much time with questions on this, because Daniel chapter 2, we will always come back to this summary when we deal with the other prophetic chapters, when we get later on in the book. So what will happen is that from next week, we continue on some of the narratives. A lovely story about a fiery furnace, but I'm dropping little nuggets as we go along to tell you that those are not just stories, but they're pointing to something else. So for instance, this might look like a story of a king who had a dream he couldn't understand, but really this is also a story of a group of men who were the remnant of their community, who remained steadfast in the face of Babylon paganism and remain steadfast to God. That is a powerful message, because that is something that we all need to remember and keep true, right? Right, so I have one question that I saw came up on the YouTube side that says, isn't Christianity just a cult that a lot of people believe in and imagine it's true without any good evidence that would prove it's true? Well, you know, this lesson today, more than anything else, proves that God's word is true. Because this is one that is very much topical and talks about the rise and fall of kingdoms that really happened. And we are seeing that God predicted this way beforehand. So the fact is, Christianity requires a lot of faith. It cannot be just logically being able to prove stuff. We have to exercise faith. And if we have the faith to believe what we read, and it makes sense to us. That's why I like this postmodern era in which we are, because in this era, it's more about what is the value of your belief to you. You could run around as a headless chicken and not too sure what the future holds, or you could look at this prophecy and say, you know, this is telling me that God has a timetable and soon he will come. And if I need to learn more about what he's saying, so that I can better appreciate what is going to happen to me in the future.
Yes, sir. Correct is right.
Yes. All right, folks. Well, we have done well. We're a little bit over our time. Try to finish by 4 o'clock, but we will stop here for today. And we again next week, same time. I have made it a recurring webinar, so it should come up again on your schedule for next week. If you hit the same link, it should come back up. And I think this is a little bit neater, and it doesn't allow for a lot of the interruptions we had last week with people not muting and stuff. And if you want to have a face-to-face live after, you could do that after I exit the meeting on your own Zoom call. But thank you all, and God's blessing. Let's just offer a final word of prayer before we close. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the message you've given us today. We thank you that thousands of years ago, you wrote this down to the mind of Daniel so that we will have guidance for today. And so in the face of COVID-19 and all uncertainties, we put our trust in you, that one day your kingdom will be established and we will be citizens of your kingdom which will last forever. We pray that the prayer we pray, the Lord's Prayer, will one day come to reality, and indeed your kingdom will last forever and ever. Amen. Bless us and guide us, and we thank you all who participated today. Bless us all in our personal and our family lives as we go through this period of unprecedented times in our earth's history. It's our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen.
Amen.